And now for something completely different. Yeah, today I'm going to be doing roster duster for the MK arenas. I've actually made this tier list myself. Obviously, I've tweaked it for this. The normal version you'll find linked in the description is just a normal tier list. I've gotten every stage from every game, including the variants and the repeats. Because there is some discussion to be had about the different versions of certain stages. Because sometimes you just have a different version of a stage and this new version just is way cooler than an older one, or vice versa. I'm not necessarily going to be picking one version of every stage or like a couple that are very different. Some of them could just be different ones, and it's kind of like, I guess if I had to give some kind of context for it, it would be if we had an MK game that covered the whole story. Some of these could just be different points in time. Like you might have an area that, say, the pit, and it's like here's one version of the pit, and then you have another version of the pit from a different game, but it's from different points in time, or the characters go to a different universe or what have you, any kind of bullshit. It's basically whatever, you get the idea. So yeah, this took a long time to put together, just because I was trying to make sure everything is in order, MK1, then 2, then 3, and so on, because tier list makers still don't let you rearrange the portraits, and so you can have some really shit looking ones. Thanks, tier list maker, you fuck. So let's kick it off with MK1. So the thing about MK1 is these are all very classic stages. Other than the garden, every single one of these has come back in a subsequent game. And they've all had various alternate takes, some reworkings. Goro's Lair has, not counting Shaolin Monks, like 4 different versions. It can be tricky to look at these straight away and say, this one should stay because, well, maybe there's a better one later. But these are such classic stages, and I mean, I say the garden probably is like the weakest one. Like, I feel like that's probably the one that doesn't really have like a solid concept behind it. It's not a bad one, it's just the others, like you can see, like here's the big place where all the fights happen in front of a crowd, including the final boss. Here's where you're fighting right in front of the final boss, like proving yourself to him specifically. Here's the Warrior Shrine where all the warriors have got statues, except Scorpion Sub-Zero share one for some reason. The Pit, where you can knock your opponent off onto the spikes, which are also an arena. And then you have Goro's Lair, this dungeon where you fight Goro and Shang Tsung. It's kind of weird that you don't fight Shang Tsung in his throne room. And then you just have the garden. It's like, it's not really got a solid concept behind it. So it's kind of forgettable. And so that's why it was kind of merged with the Warrior Shrine in a way in MK9. Like the version they had in MK9 is a lot better, I would say, but we'll come to that later. For MK2, again, a lot of absolute classics. Khan's Arena, again, fighting in front of the final boss. There's something about it, maybe it's just because there are times when that happens, but to me, looking at this compared to the Shang Tsung one, it's like, I mean, this kind of takes the best aspects of both, and it's like, you're right in front of the boss. Like, he could just reach out and grab you at any time, like if you wanted to challenge you. And it's also kind of cool that these two in 1992 and 1993, they actually have... Well, Shao Kahn does. I forget if there is a variant for Shang Tsung because you don't fight in there, but yeah, the fact there's a variant where Shao Kahn isn't on his throne because he's fighting you, that's really cool. I like when stuff like that happens where you can have a character just in the background unless they're fighting, and like some Capcom games have done that. It's cool, and I wish that could be done more often. I mean, we had it in MK11 as well with Johnny Cage in the tank bunker. The Armory is honestly kind of forgettable because the Armory's had a few versions, but I don't feel like there's ever really been a version that was particularly memorable. I think if we saw something like, think about the Cyber Factory in MK11, the way we see some of the cybers being put together and such. Imagine that where we actually see the process of some big weapon being made, like perhaps a Warhammer, and we see like the molten steel being poured into the mold and stuff like that. Or perhaps if it was just a ton of weapons that can represent all different characters. The Armory as a stage has the most potential in something like Shaolin Monks because of the way that game works. We can just pick up weapons where you can have tons of weapons all over the place. You know, it'd be like the knife shot fight scene in John Wick 3, I think it was. Weapons all over the place, just pick them up and start using them on each other. But something like MK2, there's very little there, and you could do some of that stuff in like Armageddon or X in 11 with the stage interactions, but probably won't have any version of the Armory on here in the end. The Deadpool, you know, obviously iconic. The acid bath fatality, very good. And that's only there for now because I feel like the later games have better aesthetics for it, so I might end up dropping this in favour of one of those. The Combat Tomb, again, there's not really anything substantial about it. I mean, it's cool that you have the spikes above for like a stage fatality, which spikes on the ceiling is really underutilised for stage fatalities and death traps. I guess it's just harder to get the opponent up there. So then we have the Living Forest, again, just iconic. You know, I'm trying to think, was there ever a game other than Shaolin Monks where you can throw people into the mouths? I don't have Shaolin Monks on this thing, it's just the fighting games. I'm trying to think, did we ever actually have a fighting game where you could do that? Because you know that was rumoured for like basically every version. Huh. Now we have the Pit 2. Now the Pit 2 is interesting because it doesn't exist anymore. Because everything about it that made it cool and unique has just been transferred to the Pit 1. some people may not really think about this, but you know, you look at the Pit 1, there is no other bridge there. This is the one on Shang Tsung's Island, which we always see now. Every version of the Pit we've had in the Netherrealm era is this. The one in Outworlds doesn't exist, but like the design of the bridge here, that's carried over to this. The extra bridge in the background with people fighting on it, that's carried over. Even, you could argue, the cinematic camera following the opponent down as they fall to their death, that has been carried over to the MK1 version. So the MK2 version basically has no reason to exist, which I think is a shame, because basically what we think of as the Pit now just is the one from MK2, just that the Pit stage fatality from MK1 has been added to it. So I'm going to drop the original Pit and keep this one, because it is just, the original Pit just had the stage fatality and that was it, but this has, the Pit 2 is more influential than the Pit 1, ultimately, and it just has so much more style to it. It kind of feels like a do-over, like this is what the Pit 1 was supposed to be, and that's definitely how it feels nowadays with the newer versions. So the Pit 1, don't get me wrong, it is good and iconic, but it's kind of been supplanted, like the modern Pit is the Pit 2, so the Pit 1 is just a prototype, effectively. Or the way it would be on like a NES port, where they had to scale back on a lot of the detail to make it run. And even then, you know. So then we have the Wasteland. I feel like the original Wasteland is like the least interesting version of it, because the ones since have done way better stuff, because here it's just a place with a purple sky. Like it helps to convey that this is an alien world. One of the few stages that really goes for that, because you see all this like, yeah, the sky here is purple, but it looks somewhat natural in a weird way. But here it's like, yeah, there's just dark, gloomy purple. Orange and blue, yeah, like that exists as sky colour, like, you know, purple, like where do you see that? But newer versions have done way better stuff with it. The original version just isn't that interesting, unfortunately. Okay, I might make an alternate version of this where I basically just go through and be like, I will have one version of every stage and that's it, and then every other one has to get erased. I'll probably do a version like that as a second version of this. Here's all the Wastelands, which one's going to get to stay, which one's going to go. But for now, yeah. The tower, I feel, is just not that interesting. It's like the gardens. There's not much of a solid concept, and it's just a place. More's been done with it in more recent years, where you'll see, like, the background, the sky just changes really quickly, or context given that this is basically a prison. That, I think, does a lot more with the concept than this, which is very little. And then we have the last MK2 stage, which is the portal, which ended up being the hub in Shaolin Monks. I don't know. The portal thing is cool looking, but I don't know if I'd necessarily say it's particularly interesting as a stage. More as like, I don't really know how to put it. I guess it's like it has an interesting kind of concept with the portal in the background and Shadow Priest and what that implies about them. So I guess it's more interesting from a lore perspective than anything else. As an actual stage, is not that interesting. But I'll leave it there for now to move on to the MK3 stuff and come back to it later. So a lot of people didn't like the MK3 stages, from what I understand, because they were a bit too mundane, but I think it really works. I mean, you look at the streets, and I think you can see, I'm not sure if you can see it in the bridge, but you haven't seen it from the rooftop. So there's Khan's Fortress. And the cool thing is, with the angle that Khan's Fortress is at, like that gives you an idea of space for these locations. Like you can tell that from here, if you were standing here on the roof, and you'd have to go further to the right and then obviously go down to get to this front facing angle. So it gives you an idea of the geography of the location. And that's one of the things I think actually works really well with MK3 is things are a lot more cohesive in terms of style. I mean, look at MK2 again, it's like purple sky, black sky, or maybe that's just like the tree line. Blue sky, orange, another purple, another blue. Maybe that was the intent and it's supposed to imply other worlds that have merged with Outworld. Like maybe that was the intent, but as far as feeling like one cohesive place, I feel like that's one of the big things MK3 does really well with its stages. It's one big cohesive thing. It feels consistent in a way that MK2 doesn't. And again, that's not a bad thing with MK2, I just think it's really neat what MK3 does. The graveyard's a fun one, nice little references to the characters and even, well, to the creators rather. It does have Johnny Cage, his tombstone, it's like, yep, Johnny Cage is dead. The bank is similar to the rooftop. I mean, it's the same place, just like I think you put your opponent through the ceiling and end up on the roof, and that's cool. And the bank is a cool location, don't get me wrong. I wish we'd see more stuff like that. It's a shame we didn't get an MK9 rendition. I mean, that could have been a cool little like stop on the way down towards the bridge in the street in MK9. Striker and Kabbalah going down through the building. Instead of just cutting to them at the bottom, we have them get ambushed by Melina or someone there. I put the bank in TBA for now. I like it, but it's a case of you don't really need it alongside the rooftop, and I just prefer the rooftop just a little bit because I like rooftop fights. I mean, I feel like it's impossible to not be a fan of big, dumb rooftop fights when you're a fan of Yakuza, you know? Then we have the bell tower. It's another one of those where it's very basic in its initial incarnation, and more interesting stuff was done with it in later incarnations, so I'll leave that off for now. Subway, absolute classic. I mean, there's a reason they brought it back for Armageddon and made it the background for one of the main menus, because it's really cool. And I love seeing how they handle the whole train running people over fatality in each game. I feel like actually in MK9 that was one of the stronger stage fatalities, holding the opponent's face against a train as it passes through and just throwing them into another train. The fatalities weren't like completely ridiculous with MK9, like it was getting there, but it wasn't quite there yet. Soul Chamber, another classic. It may get replaced by another one later, because there have been a few incarnations of this. There's been like 4, I think. It's a really cool space, and I feel like it's one of those where it does live up to its potential in its initial incarnation, unlike something like the Bell Tower or the Tower. Well, is this the Tower or the Evil Monastery? Because it's one of those where it changes names between games, it makes it complicated for no reason. Why are you doing this, guys? What are you doing to me? Cathedral, I think it's called. Another really good one. Also been revisited, but I think I actually might prefer this one. I guess we'll see when we come up on revised editions in time. I never much cared for the balcony. Like, it's clearly trying to evoke Goro's lair with the big archways and everything made of stone. I forget if the Soul Chamber is actually directly underneath. I don't know if that is a thing that happens in gameplay, but that does seem to be the implication. There's this green well, dead center, and this is here, as if that leads up into the well, or vice versa. Like, and it's another cool little thing with the locations, but as an actual stage, it's kind of really dull. And then Noob's Dolphin is just the same thing, but without the archways. Which is not a bad way of making additional stages. Like, you just have certain elements just be removed or added to have an alternate place. Like here, like you see the bridge from the Pit 2 was used in this one as well. Okay, the Pit 3, I can see why that never came back in any incarnation. It basically feels like the Pit is a tradition, and it's kind of cool that it's the final boss stage has a stage fatality. I forget if Khan can actually pull it off as an AI opponent, but it's a cool idea that they fight the final boss and you lose and he just fucking throws you off a bridge into these spinning blades. It's a cool idea. It's just, you know, we've had better, and it kind of feels like it's just trying to be different. Like, you know, you could just take the Pit 1 or the Pit 2 and just have that as the final boss stage and it would work just as well. So, well, that's cool. The actual stage itself, isolated from that, is not that interesting, unfortunately. Then we have this one, which I think works better as a final boss stage for Khan. Kombat doesn't have the whole, he can just throw you to your death casually. It does have this cool little, the ominous lighting really adds to it, and it also really works well as a part of Hell, because when you're in Hell, you uppercut the opponent enough, you can smash them through the ceiling of Hell into Khan's arena, which not only implies that the Netherrealm is part of Khan's army, which it is, we know that from Scorpion's bio and ending, but it's just a nice little surprise. You uppercut the opponent out of Hell itself. You functionally punch someone out of Hell, and then you end up in front of the devil, right? It's a very cool thing to just suddenly, oh, there's Shao Kahn. It's just a really cool little thing. I like it a lot. And then we have, so the bridge is fine. It's not bad. You can kind of see why they merged it with the street in MK9. You know, we already have a street level street. I'll put it in TBA for now. Because again, it's not bad. It's just, you could argue it stands out a bit by not having Khan's palace in the background. But I feel like the fact that it doesn't makes it feel more generic. I think it would have been cool if every single stage that's just set in the city had Khan's palace in the background, but from a different angle. So this one could have been from behind. Well, the vibe I've always gotten is that this is just down the street from the street. As if this is like the further right version of the location. Like, you start here on the roof of the bank, you head down to the street, you move along to the right, you end up here in front of it, then you go further to the right and you end up at the bridge. Maybe that was the intention. That's just the vibe I've always gotten. I mean, it's nice that it has a different sky instead of just like the same one as the others. In a similar vein, you got this, which I actually think is nicer. I prefer the, I think it's called the Waterfront, which is just by the water, which I always imagine is just the river that runs underneath the bridge in the bridge. So like if you were here and then you hopped off the railing here or on this side behind you, you'd basically end up on this walkway. I quite like it, but unfortunately we don't get to go there. It's a shame we didn't have Injustice style stage transitions for MK9, because then you could have had it that from the street / the bridge in MK9 you jump down to here and then you can knock your opponent in the water, something like that. This one is alright. It's basically taking the choose your destiny locale and having it be an arena. But that's kind of all it's got going for it. I like the idea, but it's a bit dull, you know? Likewise, just having this a bridge in front of a portal, like, and this is clearly just basically the pit 2, I mean, that's pretty much just the same bridge from the background. That, but in front of a giant blue portal. I mean, it could have been cool if they made it that it was just the pit 2, but the background's Earthrealm now, to show the merger. Because other than Khan's fortress just being there, they don't really do a whole lot with the idea of the actual merger of the realms, and I wish they'd done more with it. Jade's Desert, it's a pretty fun little idea. You got this little desert, you got Cyrax in the background, stranded to set up some lore stuff. It's different from what we've seen before, it's a desert. It's kind of like an Earthrealm-based version of the Wasteland in a way. I've never really thought about it that way, but yeah, it kind of is. It's a cool, unique locale. I've never been sure why it's called Jade's Desert. I mean, the desert has only been associated really with Cyrax and later Sindel in MK9 because of the statue over there. So I don't know what Jade's got to do with it, and I don't think MK3 or Ultimate MK3 even had a special secret boss fight with Jade anyway, so I don't know why. Then we have the courtyard, brought back, but now featuring Shao Kahn. And the time of day has changed. It's a cool thing. It's a cool way of bringing back a classic stage with a bit of a new twist to suit the story of the current game for the everyone is here thing. It's not really anything special, and I do kind of prefer just Shang Tsung. Again, it's a fun little twist on the original concept, but I prefer the original a bit more. And it's not different enough to really stand out much. Same with how they brought back the Pit 1 and 2. The Pit 2 without the background, and this version of the Pit 1, which I think was like on the NES version. These are from Trilogy. All three of these. I included them because I wanted to have everything. And there's another version of the Pit 2 with the Starry Sky. I didn't mean to use them just as like easy fodder for stages to remove, but that's kind of what it became because they are just variants on existing stages. Nothing particularly special about them. And like, when we get to MK9 with the different times of day, I'll probably just have one version of each of those and just remove the rest. So now we move on to MK4. A lot of it is repeat stages, unfortunately. It's a thing I discussed when I talked about Edenia, I think it was, on Wasted Potential. But then people started making the observation that with the original story, a lot of the bios and such really implied that what was actually going on was that Outworld was Edenia, just renamed. That makes sense. It would explain why a game set in Edenia has no Edenia stages, it's just Outworld, because Outworld is Edenia. So it does make sense, I suppose, but it's just unfortunate that we never got to see some proper Edenia locations. In the Malibu comics, when they were like showing off what Outworld was like before Khan conquered it, the Living Forest, the faces were smiling. I think they were singing too. That's kind of silly, but it's the kind of thing that we should have had, like a less corrupt version of Outworld, now that the rightful ruler has retaken the throne and restored its name to Edenia. But alas. So first off we have Elder Gods, which is just where the Elder Gods appear. And it's a shame we never saw this again. Ever since it's just basically been like the Nexus with the Elder Gods as like big ghosts. But I kind of like the idea of just the big faces. So it's almost like transmission view screens from Star Trek, just these big dumb blue faces. I kind of really like it. I wish we'd see something like that again. Not necessarily for the Elder Gods, but maybe for the Lesser Gods, like as a place for them to convene and talk, and so it'd be like their faces. Maybe like made out of their element. So like the blue is basically what the Water God looks like, where it's like water forming the face to commune with the others and stuff like that. And they got like an Earth one and fire, and you know, could be cool. Then we have Goro's Lair, which is basically just like a better view of the original. Like it's functionally the same. If I get through a skeleton zone, they've got these torches there. You can pick up rocks and throw them at people, and you basically get a wider view of the location. I think I just about prefer the MK4 version just because of that extra view we get. Can see it more clearly. Because I feel like that's important, is to be able to fully grasp what is happening and see everything clearly. Then we have the Ice Pit, which is just a place in Earthrealm. I've always associated with Lin Kuei, but I don't think we've ever had an explanation of what this place is. It's just like a little pit in a snowy place. Plus the fact that MK4 was related to MK Mythology's Sub-Zero, it makes sense as like a connection to Sub-Zero, where otherwise there isn't one, because everything else is either, a lot of the stuff is like Outworld or clearly associated with a specific character, or it's like a thing about the gods. We never really knew, but I suppose that gives it some mystique, and I think that's really cool. Then we have Living Forest again. This is one that suffers from the move to 3D. It's just a flat green texture instead of like the actual ground and like the little bits of foliage around. And of course, like the layout isn't as interesting because it's a 3D environment and not multiple layers of side scrolling where things can be more uniquely positioned. It's fine, but it's probably like the weakest rendition of it because of the low amount of detail, which is something that a lot of games suffer from, transitioning from 2D to 3D in that time. But I feel like aside from that, okay, I'm not sure about this one, which I think is called the Prison, because I think it's supposed to be based on the prison from MK4. Aside from that, I think the rest of the MK4 stage is actually really solid. Like Reptile's Lair looks so cool, like a cool little Saurian location. I'd love to have some context for the two Reptile's Lairs we've had, but I don't think we've ever gotten any. Then we have a Shaolin Temple, like in MK Mythologies, just like where Scorpion was killed by Sub-Zero. Wind World, which is a pretty basic one, it's just like a big circular area with like wind and rain, but it has a cool kind of vibe to it, which I think is helped by the fact that Raiden's opening monologue takes place here. It's called Wind World, which suggests it's associated with Fujin, and it may be based on that level from MK Mythologies, but it gives off the vibe of this could be where Raiden fought Shinnok all those years ago. So it really has this cool feel to it, even though it's a pretty basic arena. Then we have, I think it's called The Well, which is just a cool and fiery Netherrealm location with skulls you can throw at people. I mean, throwing skulls at people is always fun. You know, Sub-Zero does it in the Shaolin Monks intro. It's great. We should do that more in games. Go for it. The Soul Chamber. I think the Soul Chamber in MK Gold is not as good as the original. Even though it's functionally the same, it's just that being further away from the actual soul thing, it makes it less imposing, because it's basically this big demon head, you know? And so that's one of the things that makes it such a cool locale. But now we're further away from it, so like the danger feels less imminent. Which I suppose is another way you could look at with the Living Forest, like we're further away from the trees. You know, it does depend on the location. You have different vibes there. Some locations it's better to have more coverage of the location, see more of it. Others it's better to be closer in, more claustrophobic, closer to the danger. Even if it has no actual gameplay practical purposes, like you can't throw someone into the Well of Souls or anything. Like you can't do that, but it still has that feel, and I think that's important. Then we have this Hell location, which I think they just called it Hell, like that one. And in fact, you actually see like that right outside this one. You know, we don't have an actual boss arena for Shinnok. Shinnok didn't really have a boss arena. You could fight him anywhere, which was different, but it makes that fight stand out less. You know, you think about the final bosses of the previous games, and it's like you beat Goro and do an endurance round, and then Shang Tsung just bursts in and you fight him in Goro's lair, where countless other warriors have died. You can even see like a dead person on the wall. Then you have Khan's arena, where Khan's going to fight you in front of all of his people. Thousands of people that have gathered to watch the Emperor beat you down, and you're going to beat him down and liberate these people. Great. And then we have MK3, where it's not as good, but it at least has like the context of you're going to beat Khan and eject him from Earthrealm and get rid of his palace. And like this is like the heart of his palace, as if you fought your way there to fight him. I thought it would have always been cool if they did a Shaolin Monks 2, like based on MK3. That's what the last level would be, fighting your way through Khan's fortress to get to him and fight him there. I always thought that would have been really cool. So then MK4 comes along, and Goro, the sub-boss, gets, you know, it's a boss and location from a previous game, and then Shinnok just fought wherever. So then they put in this throne room, not specifically for that purpose, but it gives you a bit more of an idea of what Shinnok's base of operations is like. It gives the vibe of the heroes have fought off Shinnok in Edenia, and then he's fled back to the Netherrealm, go back to his home turf and kick his ass there. So I think it's a really good addition. This stage, I don't remember what it is. I gathered these images from MK Warehouse, some from Google Image Search as well, but I don't remember this stage at all. Which is weird, because like this is another gold stage, and I've played gold a lot more than 4, but I do not remember this stage, so I can't include it. This one is cool Outworld like location, which it probably is meant to be like an Outworld place. Again, I forget the name. A lot of the arenas it's hard to remember the names of because there's so many of them, but it stands out in MK4 because like it's the only one with the predominant colour being purple. You know, the rest have got like the hot fires, blue, rainy, windy location. You got this nice warm Shaolin Temple, the alien green of reptiles lair, and then you got this snowy place, and it had a good selection of locations. Each one feels distinct. You can at least say that. Like, arguably more so than any other MK game, it feels like each location is more distinct and unique. Maybe some people would prefer like more consistency, and it does depend on what specifically is done with it or what the story being told is. Sometimes more consistency and shared ideas is better. Sometimes you want to convey like a larger conflict, so sometimes it's better to just have a wider range of locations. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. It's ultimately up to the individual which one works better for which game, but I really like the aesthetic of everything being more distinct. And then we have this, which is just the background for the towers, Choose Your Destiny. I'm not sure if you can just load that up as a stage, like with like a cheat code or something, because it is listed as a stage on MK Warehouse, so I'm not quite sure, but I'm just going to have to put it in erase. Technically cheating by actually using it as like an excuse to keep another stage, but you know, I don't care. You know, I'm starting to think this one might end up being at least recorded across multiple sessions, or maybe being like an entire multi-parter, because I've been recording for almost 40 minutes and I've gotten through MK1 to 4. Hopefully I'll be able to blaze through MK9 because it is just almost exclusively old locations, but yeah. So we have the acid bath. Pretty sure that's what it's called. But yeah, it's like another acid location. Unfortunately, they didn't have stage fatalities in Deadly Alliance, but it's a cool location. I feel like it's a real shame we never got that brought back in a later game. Like, you have the things that are spewing the acid. Just imagine it being like in Armageddon. Like, you know, when you go in Reptile's Lair, you can smash people against the eggs and they just like bounce back as they pop. That, but with this, I just thought they put off the edge into a death trap, you know? Just like if your aim's a little off, they won't go straight into the acid, but you can knock them into this thing so they'll bounce off and you can get a few more hits in. Maybe juggle them into a death trap. You know, it could work. Then we have the Dragonfly. There's clearly an attempt to have more storyline stuff, like each stage has like a dedicated explanation for what it is. And this one is like, this is just a transport around Outworlds, you know, on the back of this fake dragon thing that's just flying around. It's a cool idea. I really like the idea, but it's one of the things where it's like how details between games change, like Deadly Alliance establishes that Shang Tsung's ship doesn't go directly to the island, it goes to the portal, the new portal from this game. And so it's like, yeah, you go to this portal and it'll teleport you to Shang Tsung's island, or you can use it to go to Outworld, but like Raiden can't just open the portals himself, even though in other games he can and other people can do that. It's inconsistent. Like, I think they were trying to set up firm rules in Deadly Alliance, and then that would ultimately be contradicted later on for plot convenience, like Raiden getting around the different realms. In MK11, for example, or X, it'd be a real pain in the ass if they had to go to this portal place every time. But yeah, the portal itself has a pretty good vibe. I quite like the style of it. Yeah, I'm already on my 5th row of fucking keeps, and I've only got 3 of erase, so we have to start getting into some more erasing. But yeah, I like the vibe of this location, this like little platform just in the middle of the ocean where a portal opens to take you to other realms. I think it's mostly bolstered by that particular plot detail, that this is where you go to travel between the realms. Contradicted now, but I think it adds to the world. I think that's quite cool. Then we have, I think it's called the Drum Arena, which is just on a cliffside, there's like a dude drumming. It's fine. Probably the least interesting of all the stages in Deadly Alliance. Yeah, I feel like it has like the weakest concept. I mean, the fact it's called the Drum Arena because there's a guy on drums tells you we're in trouble. The Kuatan Palace is just fucking great. I'm not sure if it's specifically supposed to be like where King Gorbak rules from, especially since Gorbak isn't even mentioned. Gorbak isn't mentioned, I don't think, between MK2 in 1993 and the MKX comic in 2015. Other than when he got that cameo in The Journey Begins. Other than that, I think that's it for Gorbak. So it's not clear if this is actually where the Shokan rule from, and these statues, are these meant to be like past Shokan rulers? Just having this cool fiery arena with the lava and such. It's another one of those that would have really benefited from coming back in a subsequent game, so they could use the death traps and stuff, and maybe like a Shokan weapon in the center of the stage you could pick up and just twat people with. Oh, that would have been good. Actually, what could have been really cool could have been like a set of Shokan gauntlets, and then you could make it that you can only pick up 1 pair of gauntlets to fight the opponent with, because you've only got 2 arms. But that means the opponent can then pick up the other 2. So 1 weapon can be used by 2 people at once instead of having to knock it out the other person's hand or something. Then we have, I think it's called the House of Pekara, which is where Kenshi's ancestors are sealed. This is where presumably the scene this MK Snowblind is going to take place. I doubt it's going to look anything like this, but it wouldn't surprise me if they like name dropped Pekara or had like this big window here, like some kind of vibe like that here in the movie. The movies are willing to reference stuff from the 3D era, so expect to see something from this show up in the movie or get name dropped. I mean, how can you say no to the area outside the Lin Kuei Palace? I mean, it just looks so cool. Literally, in fact. Yeah, smashing people through icicles was just always fun, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think the ice is reflective. I could be wrong. But it was one of my favourite locations back in the day to fight in Deadly Alliance. The background was really good, and it ties into the progression of one of the characters in his story. There's just a lot to like with it. I forget its name, it's the Lung something temple. It's actually a location in Outworld. You wouldn't guess it from the look of it. You assume it's like an Earthrealm place, but no, it's Outworld. There's just other temple, and there is some actual lore to it, but I feel like that's another thing here actually, is that the 2 stages I'm cutting here are 2 of the 3 that have absolutely zero connection to the plot of Deadly Alliance. You got ones that are relevant to the backstory, where this is where some characters' stories come from, or a notable scene takes place. Like this is where Goro's funeral happens in Kitana's non-canon ending. The ones that are directly related to the Deadly Alliance. These ones just have nothing to do with the plot. There's no actual connection, no motivation for their inclusion. They're just an idea that the team had and put it in. Like they didn't even associate this with a character, which they could have done, but they didn't. Now, admittedly, I feel like the water around it is actually a really cool thing. It's like if that was there in the Wuxi Academy, the Wuxi Academy arena would probably be an instant keep. I know there is water in the Shaolin Monks version, that's just so that you don't just fall to your death and die. You know, you just have water down there, you can jump back up. I do prefer the Wuxi Academy just a bit, partly because it's significant. I mean, this is where Liu Kang dies. But the two have similar setups with like the ropes holding the arena in place, but I just like this one a little bit more because of that story significance and just the big statues holding it instead of just being on ropes. Again, it's like how MK1's pit is improved by taking elements from MK2's pit. This would be improved by taking the water from this and putting it on there. Maybe some of the other background details and putting it on there. But this is like a sort of rather unmemorable location from Deadly Alliance, unfortunately. And then just to close out this particular set, the Sana Ruins, which I like it. I do like this desert location. The location where Kano kills Sonya in his ending, and that's kind of it. It's just like a desert ruins, which is fine. I don't dislike it. I don't think there's any like particularly wasted potential with it. It's just I think it's one I'd like to keep, but I am perfectly fine with cutting it when the time comes to actually go through the TBAs. I really like this one, just smashing through terracotta soldiers, the big Quan Chi. See, the games have ruined me. It's not Quan Chi's amulet, it's Shinnok's. The big Shinnok amulet here. That's a portal that Quan Chi escaped from the Netherrealm through. It's just a cool area, and I think it's one of the things that helps to convey the idea of the Dragon King's army, because you see a lot of these terracotta soldiers, which I think are supposed to be like the mummified remains of the actual soldiers, or at least to imply the size of the army. So that helps to convey just what a threat the Deadly Alliance are getting up to. That's the thing that you can really do with these arenas. I like it when an arena in a fighting game can tell a story or enhance an existing story through implication. Like, I think it was Thanos' stage in Marvel Superheroes, where you can see a bunch of the Avengers turn to stone in the background. That not only explains why those characters aren't in the game, it also implies the power of Thanos. He's just already beaten these powerful Avengers like Thor and Scarlet Witch. And so it's like he sets him up as a threat, and I like when arenas can do that. And I think the 3D era probably did the best job of that. And then we have Moloch's Lair, which is basically just like a take on Goro's Lair. It's fine, but we already have Goro's Lair, and I prefer that a bit over Moloch's Lair. If this had been in like UMK3, you would have been able to uppercut the opponents up into Shang Tsung's palace, because it is in the basement of Shang Tsung's palace. The Nethership, I like the Nethership. It's cool to reincorporate stuff from MK1. I mean, this was the 10th anniversary. They didn't make it a big 10th anniversary thing, but it's set 10 years later. It brings back the final boss of the first game as the antagonist again. It kills off the original protagonist to have someone else take over to usher in a new era of the franchise after the first decade. And you get to learn more about the process of getting to Shang Tsung's island. In fact, that's where Raiden actually meets up with the heroes on Shang Tsung's island. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to tie back into MK1 in like a really neat way. That's not just let's literally bring the characters through time, and it's also a better celebration of an MK anniversary than let's put out a double pack of MK11 Ultimate and the 2021 movie, which anyone who's remotely interested in either of these things already owns. So I like the Nethership exterior and interior in different games. It's a shame we never got both in one, because it would have been really cool to just uppercut your opponent on the deck and then they smash through the floor into the interior. I like it, but I am willing to let it go. I think it's just more significant for it being the ship that takes people to Shang Tsung's island than it is as an arena itself. And so now we have just 4 more Deadly Alliance stages, and then I'm going to take a recording break, because holy shit, I've been going a long time. So 50 minutes, So now we have the Dragon Egg Chamber. Oh, that would have been really cool, actually. I imagine as like a death trap. Forget the lava, that's basic bitch shit. Smash your opponent into the egg and it cracks, and then Onaga's spirit possesses that character, but they're like incompatible, and the body explodes. That would have been... Oh, God. See, this is why we need an MK game with all the arenas and stories coming back, because then you can just take shit like this. It'd be so cool. So I quite like the Dragon Egg Chamber. It's got a cool vibe. Ironic, given how there's lava. But I like it, and it's like, yeah, it's an arena that exists to set up a potential future plot point that they did end up following in the very next game. I've no idea if the team were dead set on actually doing Onaga as the next game when they made Deadly Alliance, but yeah, they did do it in the end. So now we have the Palaces of the Two Sorcerers. The Solnado is such a striking image. There's something about like a big glowing green thing that just has such a a cool vibe to it. So you see all these souls flying into the Soulnado from the outside of Shang Tsung's palace. And then you have the inside where, you know, that's where you fight Shang Tsung at the end of the game. It's another one of the things where it's like you have two arenas. One where you fight the final boss and one that's just outside of that location. It helps to convey an idea of progression, like you're working your way there. Of course, that only really works if it lines up such a way where this is right before you fight Shang Tsung. Do this and then fight Moloch and then Shang Tsung straight away. You get that feel of you're outside, you have to go inside through the basement, and then you come back up and fight Shang in his throne room, which, well, not really a throne room because he doesn't have a throne, but, you know. I really like both of these stages. Meanwhile, Quan Chi... Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, I see. Because you like Shang Tsung and you don't like Quan Chi, so Shang gets 2 stages and Quan Chi gets none. None. If you know these stages, you probably have figured out why I'm getting rid of this. And you might have to wait for a part 2 because... literally dying. So, 2 more to do, which are the Tournament Edition exclusive stages. One is the Swamp. It had a different name as well. I forget what it was called, but basically, it's a swamp. It was going to be in Deadly Alliance, but got cut. But then, because Tournament Edition was like half of the Deadly Alliance GBA ports, but not the full half, I'd love to see someone do like a ROM hack that amalgamates both into one. It probably exists somewhere. Yeah, they had some exclusive characters and locales, and this was one of the arenas. And that's a cool thing. I like when unused ideas get used elsewhere, either in the same project or in a later one. You know, like how Havoc came about because I'd scrap design for Noob Saibot, stuff like that. And so taking an old unused stage and bringing it back, really good. It is kind of just a swamp. And because it's on the GBA, there's even less stage interaction than in the actual console version, which only had like the barrier around the arena and occasionally things you can smash people through. So it's not that interesting. Then you have this one. I don't remember what this one's called or what the premise for it is. It's some kind of temple, I think. Again, because on the GBA, they can't really bring it to life in a substantial way. It would be cool if we could get like a remaster of Deadly Alliance that could port some of this Tournament Edition stuff in. It would obviously be easier to do that with Serena, Sector, and Noob, because the movesets already exist in the game, and you can just port over the models from like Deception and Armageddon. But I think it would be cool if we could see like these stages get another shot. It's just tricky to do now because, not just because it's part of the 3D era, because the gameplay has gone back to 2D, so the arena design has changed. Effectively, arenas in the 3D era are basically squares, whereas they are rectangles in the 2D games. So it would be fundamentally different anyway, but I think a swamp location could be a cool one. The closest we've really had to a swamp outside of this would be the Kuatan Jungle, which had like a little creek running through it. I wish we had more locations like that, because it's a cool idea, it's a cool vibe. It's good as a place for Reptile to claim it as his own. Yeah, there are more stages you can associate with Reptile than there are that you can associate with Johnny Cage, and Johnny Cage literally appears in one. There's a stage that he is actually in the background of when he's not in use, and somehow Reptile has more stages associated with him, or that can be easily associated with him, than Johnny does. This is bullshit. I'm not having it. I'm going to stop now. I'm going to stop recording. Maybe make this a part 1. Because, like, Please watch part 2. Maybe there'll be a part 3. I don't know how long this is going to be going on, because there's still a lot of these. It would not surprise me if I end up having to stop recording after getting through DCU. But yeah, be sure to come back and watch the other parts of this if they're separate videos. Watch all my videos, please. Trying to get to 100k, and my sub count has gone up like less than 200 in the last month, and that makes me fucking depressed, because I'm probably not going to reach 100k before I die, which, if my throat is any indication, is probably any day now. Hey.